Welcome to the Mom as Well podcast, where we are digging deep into the gifts and the gaps of foster and adoptive parenting. I'm Tara Hutton, and I'm glad you're here.
Mama's Well.
Yes, she is. Hi, Arnold.
Hello.
It's kind of funny, isn't it? Sitting here like this. Yeah. We haven't done this before. I have a special guest with me today, and his name is Arnold Valdez. And Arnold, I'm going to say how I met you. 2016, I think. Kyle and I made a phone call to DePelchin. We were in the process of receiving our daughter's sister, which at the time they were both in foster care, both of our daughters. That's kind of confusing, isn't it? We had one girl, and then the other one was coming, and we needed an agency. And so we reached out to DePelchin because DePelchin has a tender place in our heart because my husband was adopted from DePelchin, and they quickly put us in touch with you. And you are let me get I want to make sure I get this right. The regional director of Child Welfare and Residential Treatment Services for the DePelchin Children's Center.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
So before I go any further, tell us what that is.
So I'm responsible for a couple of things. The recruitment and training for the state.
Okay.
So recruiting and training foster parents, anyone that's interested in fostering and adopting, we would put them through that program. And then I'm also responsible for our treatment center in Richmond that has 15 beds of kiddos that are a little bit more challenging. And so they're at the residential treatment center because they can't, they're not at a point where they can make it in a community foster home. Okay. And so then I also handle the offices in San Antonio, Austin, and Lubbock.
Okay. And with training there too?
Training. I'm statewide training.
Okay.
I do all of the curriculum and all of the training, putting it together for the state.
Okay. And that was my first introduction with you. And you guys brought Kyle, I think it was just you, brought us into a conference room. This was unusual. We were we were under a time crunch, and you went through training with us 101, which was really nice. The TBRI training, which I think we'll probably talk about that.
Right.
So that was my first introduction with you, and that was really some of my first introduction to trauma training ever. Even though I had experienced childhood trauma, I didn't really recognize just the importance of understanding, especially in my own life. I didn't understand that until I was an adult, until I was in my 30s and I started going through some therapy. But I certainly, at that point, was very new to understanding just the impact that was going to have on my children, and then again myself. It was helpful for me. This process has been symbiotic. Like, I'm learning about my daughter and myself. Hopefully I'm just a few steps ahead so I can lead, obviously, but trauma is a big deal.
It is, and I think what you're saying is absolutely on target, especially with like when I talk with educators, because they have the kids kind of in a, in that school setting. And a lot of times, where we need to come from to be able to connect the kids, it's really about where we are. And that's a lot of what the trauma is, and realizing that we've suffered trauma and how it impacts the way that we react to kids and how they react to our reactions. Because everything, for a kiddo is modeling. Like they look to us, for the relationship piece. And if we're not in tune with ourselves, which is a lot of, I think, what's going on right now with the uncertainty in the world and all the things going on. We're kind of not uncertain where things are going, and so how can they be certain when the person that is regulating that is kind of all over the place? And so that's something.
That is exactly right. That's. I'm so glad you're here, because that's the kind of stuff I want to talk about. You have other experience because your wife is a school teacher.
Yep.
And you've been married for almost 20 years.
Yeah, in October it'll be 20 years.
And a daughter. Tell me about your family.
So my wife is a teacher. She's taught first grade for probably 16 years. And we met in college, and so one of the things that I've always been in social work, working with kiddos, youth at risk. I worked with pregnant and parenting teens for a while, and then kids that are transitioning out. And one of the things that with all the kids I've ever worked with, the hardest part for them tends to be school, for a lot of different reasons. And one of the things that kind of just us around the dinner table and going back and forth, I would often find, my wife would come home and talk about work and talk about the kids, and this kid's hard and this kid's that. And I realized that, there wasn't a whole lot of understanding about, she was taught, and let me take a step back, she was taught classroom management like all teachers are.
Yes. Red, yellow, green cards, things
right,
like that.
or faces
Yeah.
or the pens. And that's I think one of the things that educators are missing, and I often train educators, and what I try to tell them is, they have to be social workers, but they're not taught social work. And so they don't, they're trying to manage in the classroom and what's happening right now. And that's not usually how you get a positive result from these kiddos, because their life is chaos. And we don't, we have to remember like what happened before they came to school. And a lot of times the teachers are the stability, and we have, and they don't always understand that it's bigger than the behavior that is happening right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you have two kiddos and have had some challenges, but oftentimes what they're acting out about or the behavior that they're having in the moment, it has nothing to do with what's happening. It's stems from they haven't eaten, or what they saw this morning, or whatever is going on at home, or maybe they don't know who's going to pick them up today, or maybe they don't know what's going to happen after school, or they don't, and so all that anxiety kind of bottles up and it comes out, from the back of the brain behavior, because they're operating from we say almost always a place of fear, but I want to take that a little bit and realize that it doesn't have to be fear like that we would feel fear. It's that uncertainty of what's next causes that anxiety, which then triggers those chemicals in the brain, and the kids will act from an instinctual back of the brain, which is fight, flight, or freeze.
Right.
And so we need to think about that and understand the best way to kind of combat that or help with that is to have a connection with the child, right? So we have build a connection where the child trusts you, they're able to, they're able to express their needs in an appropriate way,
Right.
and then we can kind of handle what's going on and meet those needs.
I noticed when you talk about fear, and somebody I listened to, Brian Post with the Post Institute, he talks about From Love to Fear is one of his books, but his whole thing is about, he says there's two primary emotions, which is love and fear. And so anytime you're acting, if something what we consider negative is coming from fear, he calls it fear, but that's the root, right? If we're jealous or if we're angry or whatever, we can usually track it back if we dig deep to there's something that we're afraid of.
Right. And so to think about that, I agree 100%. And everything is kind of fear-based. It's just hard for people to understand because they wouldn't really
I remember thinking,
put that in a fear place.
I probably even said this to you early on when we were in different trainings. I would say, but what is she afraid of?
Right.
I don't understand. Do you remember me saying that?
I remember you saying that she was afraid to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
And that was like you didn't, it wasn't that you didn't believe it, but you were like, maybe this is more drama or more, more.
It was feeling like that.
Right. And I
Yeah.
was like, no, there's
something.
There's something there.
Yeah.
And whatever it could be.
The toilet. It wasn't going to the bathroom. It was the actual toilet.
And there's a fear there. And that's one of the things that I think is back to the teacher thing. And my wife, I realized that a lot of the things that the kids felt, she didn't validate, right? Because she didn't agree with them, or she didn't believe, not in a bad way, but she thought, okay, oftentimes people think these kids are just, manipulating and I always would tell her, okay, so if they're manipulating, fine, what are they trying to get?
Yeah, they still have a need.
Right, because like one-on-one time with you, is that so bad that they're manipulating to get extra attention? Right. You often find teachers will say, or parents will say, well, my kids, they have attention-seeking behaviors. And I'm like, so what do you think their need might be there? Right?
Yeah.
If they're
Attention-seeking behavior.
and I'm like, if that, and so they're not getting enough attention.
Right.
And kids,
So
attention's
hard.
a funny thing because kids will get it. They're
Yeah.
gonna you either give it to them positively or they're gonna take it negatively, right?
Yeah.
Because attention is either way. But back to the teacher. So, I put this stuff together and over years trying to help her become a
Your
better,
wife, trying to help your wife.
help
Yeah,
my wife
yeah, yeah.
become a better teacher.
Yeah.
And so that's how I started. I went out and trained her, the faculty in her school,
Yeah.
and realized how much it was needed and how
Yeah.
the teachers grabbed onto it. So that, and then back to really quickly, we have a 12-year-old, just turned 12, and so I've been teaching trauma-informed care and TBRI, which is trust-based relational intervention, for 14, 15 years. And so
Okay.
we've always used it with her. And so right now, especially,
Yeah.
I've seen some, it's definite go back to the basics because we're all
Even
in a
with
place
her,
where, oh yeah,
who
because we're
hasn't
all,
experienced trauma, and you've
Right.
been using, you have
Right.
a mindset that already recognizes.
right. Well, we've all experienced trauma, right? She
Yeah.
has too with us. I mean, if we think about it, and I want to say this, those of you that have kiddos that are like middle school or even probably 5th or 6th grade and older, if we think about the last 3 to 4 years, there's been one big thing every year that has changed our world, right? Right now, everybody
Very
talks
good
about
point.
and unprecedented, that,
Yeah.
COVID's unprecedented. And so as adults, we don't know what's coming next.
Yeah.
And
Exactly right.
we have, we should be well adjusted and have coping skills, right? But our kiddos don't.
But we don't have.
Right, and we
yeah,
don't.
yeah.
So, if we look at COVID, and if you go back, there was kind of several school shootings, which that was a big thing for a while, right?
Yeah, in your
And
area.
and actually in Santa Fe, where my
Yeah.
daughter goes to school, the high school, there was a shooting,
Yeah.
and she was in.
Oh, I forgot about
So,
that.
and
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
a big thing for us, but it was a
Sure.
big thing nationwide because
Yeah.
it was several of them all together. And then if we go back further, it was Harvey, right? Which we all
Yeah.
experienced
Yeah.
together. And all of those things, are traumatic. And as adults, we've suffered that trauma and kind of, when it rains hard,
Yeah.
that's the first
Yeah.
place people go is.
Yeah, or when they start talking about hurricanes,
Or when
just
we
in
have
general.
5 of them in the Gulf at the same time right now,
yeah.
and you're like, what's going on? And so all of those things kind of stack together.
Yeah.
And then, on top of the COVID thing, now we have all the racial stuff that's going on, which is a big deal for kids. And the reason I say middle school, because they're old enough to where they're hearing things, right? And now we have kids going virtual. They're at school. They have access to the internet. They're on social media, and so it's really important that we understand and talk to them about what they're hearing, right? Because
Yeah.
if we don't have answers and we don't
How could we
understand
do that,
where.
Arnold? That's really good. So
So-
how do we do it, and at what age, and help us understand that, because this is real. This is happening right now.
And I will tell you, this is a personal choice that we have made. I always suggest it, but it is a personal choice that you have to make as a parent. One of the things that we've always done is if she asks, we tell her, right? And so whatever it is, when it was,
Yeah.
she was 8 years old and she was asking about, where babies came from.
Yeah.
We sat down and had the talk,
Yeah.
right? And so when she asked about race, or she asked about why did these things happen, we sit down, and at the most age appropriate level, we don't share more than she can take, but we answer her questions, and it's hard.
Yeah.
We talked about whatever question she has, and so we try to at least once or twice a week just sit down together and say, okay, so what's going on? Is there anything that you want to talk about? Is there any, especially she started in-person school the day after Labor Day,
Okay.
which she had been at home
Since
since
spring break,
March,
yeah.
right? And so that going back to school and interacting with people, it actually took a toll on her more than my daughter, she's an extreme extrovert. She's like me, so she gets her energy from people, but she had been isolated for so long that she forgot what it was like, and so those first couple of days she was just spent. And we sat down and said, what's going on? She's like, everybody wants a little piece of me, and
Wow.
and it's just like,
Yeah.
and I said, okay, so we had to sit down and say, hey, everybody's in the same place that you are. It is not your job to make sure that everybody's okay. It's not your job to
Yeah.
fix all your friends' problems.
Yeah.
It's not, because she was taking that on.
Sure.
That's kind of who
Yeah.
she is,
Yeah.
and it was just a lot
Yeah.
because for months it had been just her.
Yeah.
And so we need to think about how that changes. The other
Yeah.
thing that we had to help her with is a lot of the teachers and the kind of the talk that and the conversation that the adults were having at the school, she was hearing, right? And so the teachers being worried
Yeah.
about kids coming back, about getting sick, about
Yeah.
how we're going to do virtual and in person, and
Yeah.
all, and this is too much, and and her take on it was they can't even handle it. And I was
Well,
like,
I
well,
mean, that's a pretty smart.
right. And so, but we had to sit down and say, yes, that's true.
Yeah.
But that, that it's not your responsibility to fix
Yeah.
it. Your job is
Yeah.
to figure out how are we going to do school?
Right.
How are you going to get, your assignments done? And kind of really reframe some of that for her. Because it is, and it is bigger than we think. Because a lot of times we talk over kids, but they're listening.
Sure.
And they hear bits and pieces, and that's almost worse.
You know what? Especially kids who have come from hard places, especially kids who have experienced significant childhood trauma. My daughter picks up everything. I mean, she notices. A friend of mine took her to her daughter's volleyball game last weekend, high school volleyball game. My daughter went with my friend. And she said, she didn't really watch the game much. She played with the stuff in her backpack and blah, blah, blah. But she said, but you know what? When we got back home, she knew exactly how they were warming up. And she started I go, my friend says, she wasn't even paying attention. I'm like, yes, she was. She was paying attention. She is attuned to everything. What I wear, if I change something, everything.
Right, and because
they're hyper vigilant.
They are,
Yeah.
and it's because it comes from a place of survival, right? It's not like their brain developed in that place of chaos. One of the things is we often say kids from chaotic background, they have, the reason that trying to build a connection with them is so important is because if we think about the difference between a child that was developed in a chaotic background than a child that was in a nurturing background, the child that had a nurturing parent from the get-go, they very rarely go to, my parent doesn't love me, my parent's going to kick me out. Like if mom's having a bad day or dad loses his temper or whatever, they're like, okay, so I'm going to stay away from mom and dad today because tomorrow's going to be fine.
Yeah.
Right. But that kid from a chaotic background knows when mom has a bad day.
It could be life or death for them.
Right. But it's also, it's a trigger for a bigger thing. Like when parents have problems, then things happen. People change. I have to live with somebody else. I go, and so they're hyper vigilant. If we think about like somebody that lived with, and this is just an example that's easy to kind of understand, somebody that their parent was an alcoholic, right? So that kiddo would walk into the room and they have 3 to 4 seconds to figure out if their parent's drunk or not, right? And that's a survival thing, right?
Sure.
Because how do you interact with that person? If my dad's drunk, then I'm going to interact with him differently than if he's sober, right?
Such a good example.
And so that's how they perceive life, because the person that they should be able to trust most in the world has betrayed them, and so they
Or
don't
it's just
have that
been
sense of
inconsistent,
trust,
yeah.
right? And I say betrayed them in the in the sense that
That is
they
betrayal.
weren't able to form a strategy on how do I get my needs met,
Yeah.
right? And so their first instinct is not, this person's going to do the best they can for me, whoever their caregiver is or whoever they're seeking for their needs. That's not their instinct. Is when are they going to let me down? When are they going to hurt me?
Yeah.
When are they going to do the things that all the adults in my life have done?
Yeah.
And that's because at our core, we start forming those attachments and those beliefs and how we trust people very, very early on. And when kids have those chaotic backgrounds, they don't have that sense of safety, which goes back to the fear, which goes back to the, and so it's all it all ties in together. I think that, we were talking about the kids too, and just, we have to realize that the trauma that we're suffering together, it compounds, right? So we call it complex trauma.
Yeah.
And kiddos are in an environment where they're not sure what's going to happen next, their expectation is it's going to be bad. Their expectation is going to be my entire world. It's not going to be, the flood that happens is not, we have to evacuate for 3 days. It's, in their mind, it's a catastrophe that's going to uproot their family and rip it apart, because that's what happens when big things happen.
Wow. Okay, let's take, so, Arnold, so good. It's such a good thing to be mindful of because you don't realize what's happening. You just want the behavior to stop.
But even just taking, like, if when you feel overwhelmed, especially in your trying to parent or teach or be the the homeschool teacher or whatever,
Yeah.
when you feel overwhelmed, just kind of take just a beat and think about how much of this overwhelming feeling is about the child in this situation. And I almost promise you, half of it is
Oh,
not.
it's not ever for
it's
me.
right. It's the other stuff you have
Yeah.
to do, and the inconvenience of the timing, and the
Yeah.
fact that your child is needing you in this moment when you're, and so,
Yeah.
and so realize what your, what message you're giving to your child, and think about also how much, what age your child is. Like my 12-year-old, she could, if she needs me, I could say, hey, Leah, I know you need me, but I need 2 seconds.
Yeah.
And so I'll get right on that and then do what I need to do and then get to her.
Get
She's
right,
able
yeah.
to do that because she's of age. A 6-year-old,
Yeah.
I'm not going to be able to push off like that.
Yeah.
I'm going to need to give them what they need right then and there. And we can start working on, kind of building, building those breaks in for them. The other thing is have a routine at home.
Okay.
Your virtual, like, make them get out of bed, make them get dressed, have breakfast, have some, so they're actually, even though you're in the home, you're
Yeah.
not leaving. I've seen, my daughter did have virtual school before, and, just looking at their Zooms, there's kids that are in their pajamas, they're
Yeah.
still in the bed with their phone.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so have a routine, I would even we have a space, right? So
Yeah.
it's, this is school space, and try not to let them
I
do
did
anything
not do
else.
that. I just recently tweaked that because
It makes a big difference.
yeah, because one daughter's playing with the dollhouse over here, and I'm
Right.
trying, and she's going, well, I don't, in her mind, she's like,
Right.
I want to do that. I ain't doing this,
Right.
know. That's good. Okay, have a space.
So have a space and have a time and where, make them get up and get dressed. They're going to school, even though it's in your home. Try to, if you have to work from home, try to at least the beginning of their day push your meetings back or whatever, so you
Yeah.
can have 15 or 20 minutes to get them settled
Started.
and started, and then try to build your breaks in, right, so that they can independently work.
Yeah.
With the little guys, it's hard because
Yeah.
they can't independently work,
Right.
right? And so that's a challenge, and you're going
Right.
to have to, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot that we can do other than say,
Yeah.
you're going to have to spend that time and work it out. But if you have, as the kids if they're a little bit older, you can, get them settled, get them started, and then you have your meeting, and then kind of you take your break, have your lunch at the same time, have focus. Realize also though that it's not like the school day where they're getting up and moving around,
Yeah.
right? So when you start trying to pack in, 2 or 3 hours is
Yeah.
a lot,
Yeah.
right, for a kiddo to be in front of the
Yes.
computer, and so realize that. I think having a space, having a plan, realizing where you are, right? If you're not ready to teach, they're
Yeah.
not going to be ready to
Right.
learn, and unfortunately, that's the world that we live in. If they're going to do virtual school, you have to accept some of that
Yeah.
responsibility. It's not what you signed up for.
Right.
It's not what you thought you were going to
Right.
be doing. Like you said, you were an educator
Yeah.
in your former life, but you did not plan on
I didn't
educating.
think of that. Yeah.
And so, we've struggled with some foster parents too. Like a lot of our foster parents, the ones that kind of their ultimate goal is adoption, they seem this is kind of, they just take it as like
Yeah.
everybody. But we do have some foster parents that they're like, we just wanted to help a child in need, but we
Yeah.
didn't sign up.
Yeah, but we have full-time jobs,
Right,
and we
didn't
can
sign
do it.
up
Yeah,
to
yeah.
watch them 24 hours a day.
That's
They were
hard.
supposed to go to
Yeah.
school.
Right.
And so kind of struggling with that because it's turned everybody's, right?
Sure.
And then I think also being honest with them about, because the other thing is that we don't know how long you're going to be doing virtual school, right? I think that that's one of the things that is really kind of working against us is there's a lot of things that we say on this date we're going to do this, but then the numbers
don't.
go up, and then
Yeah.
we don't, and so that's that uncertainty.
Yeah.
And when we ease them back, one of the things I've been telling teachers: be ready for the kids to come back. It's going to be different than
Yeah.
your stress has been, coming from a different place, and you've been by yourself, and you've been able to turn the kids off on the Zoom, and now they're going to be in person, and they're
Yeah.
going to need more
I
from
bet
you.
that's hard.
And so
Yeah.
realize that that's going to look a little bit different, and you're
Yeah.
going to have to adjust. We all do, right?
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things that can help us the most is to create that where kids feel like we know what we're doing, even when we don't.
Okay.
Because that helps them feel safe. Like if
Okay.
the adult
And
or the
how do we
person
do
in
that,
charge.
Arnold? How do we
so
do
you
that?
fake it till you make it,
Okay.
Tara. Right.
Okay.
So, but I mean, if we plan the little things, so that at least it looks like it's structured, it looks like we know,
Yeah.
it looks like we know what we're doing.
Okay.
The more predictable and the more planned out it looks, the easier a child's
Yeah.
gonna take to it, right? And so if we can have that 15 minutes in the morning and say, okay, here's what we're doing today, right?
Yeah.
We're gonna do this and this
Yeah.
and this, and even with a kid that's old enough to understand, and then I have my meeting, and so I'm gonna
Yeah.
do this while you're doing this, and help them understand that there's gonna be 30 minutes that I'm not gonna be able to help you, and that's
Yeah.
when you need to be doing
Yeah.
this, and so we have that kind of planned out in the day, and then watch what we say to other people. One of the things that I think I talked to you about this before, like in social media, I get it, and this is a frustrating time for parents,
Yeah.
and it is absolutely okay to be frustrated, and it's absolutely okay to be overwhelmed at moments. That I'm not saying that we're going to take those feelings away, but realize what you say and what you're putting out there, that your kids are hearing it, right?
Sure.
I think it's unfortunate that we have these outlets that are so public now, right? So you have social media, you post it, and then somebody sees it and they share it, and then I think I heard, and this is just a quick example of what I'm talking about. I heard a survey, and they had said they I guess polled 100, 200 people or whatever, and 78% of them said they'd rather be quarantined with their pet than their spouse.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you told me something.
And
Yeah.
I'm like, why? That's
was
not a
sad.
good thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And people kind of laughed about it. And it's funny. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I can feel that way too. Okay, but that's not the message that we want our kids to hear, that I'd rather be with my dog than my wife. I'd
Yeah.
rather be with, and
Well,
so.
our children can, when we don't recognize the truth of it, we think they make us feel out of control. You know what I
Right,
mean? But
right.
but the truth is we're feeling out of control
Because of
bigger things. But they're like, I mean, the pet, you can put them in a kennel, you can put them outside. I mean, you know what I
Right,
mean?
yeah.
Like, so I
So
get
it's like,
it.
or the kids are driving me crazy. It's,
Yeah.
or I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Like those statements
Yeah.
when from a child that has suffered
Perspective,
trauma.
sure.
What does that really
Yeah.
mean? Like mom's going crazy. Like
yeah.
like what if that their biological mom went crazy,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So it's
Oh,
like,
that's really good to think about.
or
Yeah.
if I can't do this anymore, like, okay, so what does that mean? If you can't do this anymore,
Yeah.
where do I go? If
Yeah.
because it's not, they're just comments that we're making flippantly
Yeah.
because we're frustrated or overwhelmed, and
Yeah.
definitely those feelings are valid, but we have to be careful, like what we say in front of the kids and what we're putting out there,
That's
and
really
what we
good.
laugh about,
Yeah.
and because those things. A lot of us use humor to kind of get through the next, get through hard things, but the kids don't have that, they don't understand the sarcasm. They
if
don't.
we do say
Right.
that, then we simply
Go back.
go
right.
back, right? We just go back and say, you know what,
Absolutely.
I said that, but this is what I meant.
Right.
This is what I was thinking. This is what I was feeling. It didn't really have anything to do with you.
Right.
I was feeling overwhelmed. That's good. So how do we advocate? One thing when you were talking, I was remembering when we first started, I would get the list of what we needed to do for the day from the teacher. And we went to a tiny private school, so it was much more flexible than I'm sure some of the public schools were. And great rapport, like I text with my daughter's teacher, and she'll immediately text me back. I mean, it's amazing. And 10 kids in the class, so it's a totally different ball game. I get it. But one thing that even in that scenario, I was realizing as I was working with my daughter is I was looking at the assignment, and it was becoming too important to me that we got every single thing done the way that I thought it needed to be done. And so it took me a few weeks, though, to recognize the angst that I'm feeling is a pressure that I'm putting on myself. And then I started to just sit down with the assignments and go, okay, what is the teacher trying to achieve here? Like, if it's comprehension, then I don't want to focus too much on spelling. In other words, when
Right.
she's answering the questions. This doesn't need to be.
Right, because she's your child, you expect her to be perfect.
Well, I just, you can't work on
Right.
every single skill in every single assignment.
Right.
It's too much.
Well, because our expectations are, we're teaching our kids, like at home, it's different than school, right? Because at home, our goal is that the child becomes a successful
Right.
successful person, right? So we're working on all those skills, and we're thinking but at school, their goal is to learn these specific things,
Yeah.
and so I think that's exactly right. It doesn't, a lot of times we would push our kids harder, right? Or we expect more than the teacher would, than they're expected,
Yeah.
and realize that, right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I think my teacher, my daughter's teacher was like, absolutely, your daughter best, whatever you perceive. Because if it was a vocabulary activity, I might let her tell me the answer instead of write the answer.
Right.
Because the goal, writing overwhelms her. And the goal wasn't writing. The goal was understanding vocabulary, which is part of the reason writing overwhelms her, is because the vocabulary is low. So I started to think with my teacher brain, and I started to think with my relaxed brain in a way, quit trying to get the check marks, right? So what happens, how can we, because that's not always the case that the teacher says, I trust you,
Right.
know your teacher, you know your child best. What do you do when going back to my friend whose son is just in first grade, little guy, adorable. But her response to me was, they don't have any answers for me, because trauma's not even a thing for them. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm pointing trauma. And she's going, I get it, but trauma's not a thing for them. So what do I do? And she's the one that can hand pull her kid. How can we advocate for our kids with their teachers in the schools, districts, whether we're virtual or we're at home or a combination?
Well, I think, we all have a voice, right?
Yeah.
And so I think advocating is where we need to be. And we need to kind of put more attention on what are these kids missing by being virtual or half or this, that, or the other. And a lot of it is the socialization, right? And it tends to be, we focus on the easy stuff, which is the academics or the, I need to get this lesson done. I can guarantee you that parent is just doing the kids' work because it's easiest,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
they feel like I've accomplished it, right? And so let's just get this work done, and then we can deal with the behaviors later and this, that, and the other. And so realize what we're doing, advocate for the kids, make sure that we understand, or the school understands they're not, retaining the stuff or whatever. So, because we don't want to lose track of that. I do think that with some of the behaviors and some of the acting out and the regression that happens,
Yeah.
it's about, we need to really promote a stable environment and really go back to those core, like you said,
Yeah.
the scaffolding, and go back to where they are and help them realize that they're safe. And although we don't know what's going to happen,
Yeah.
try to create an environment where they feel like they have a handle on things, right? We want to help
Yeah.
them with coping skills. We want to help them with asking questions. If you have, it's okay to ask and to try to tie the behaviors and the acting out to needs, right? So, and a lot of times that's biological, right? So
Yeah.
it's like, right before you have a meltdown, what happens, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about it. Like when they're calm, right,
Yeah.
over milk and cookies the
Yeah.
next day or
Yeah.
later that day.
Yeah.
So you were really upset this morning. So tell me, can you remember what happened right before you? And the first couple of times they're not going to remember.
Give us an example of that.
So let's say that we're we're at school time virtually.
Yeah.
And we're asking them to complete something, right? You're asking them to write, and the writing gets overwhelming, and they throw the paper, and they have a
Yeah.
fit, and they're not doing it, and they
Yeah.
have a meltdown, right?
Yeah.
So and then we handle it the way that we would, which is you're not going to get to the writing then, right? So we calm them down, and
Yeah.
let's take a break.
Well, that's
and,
how you're handling it. That's how someone with trauma, but a teacher isn't necessarily going to handle it that way.
right. Well, no, right. At school it would be different, right? But we're talking about virtual.
We're talking about both because
Well-
I don't know, and
well, it's
maybe there's not a
different.
good answer.
Well,
Maybe
there
there's
is
not good-
well, and it's different. At school, I would tell the teacher to do something different. But in this, and so in this example, if they were at home, so I wanted, to kind of, let me finish that
Okay.
and then we can go.
Okay.
So we'd stop and we'd handle the issue, right? And then later, when the child's back to the front of the brain, things are calm and they're in a good
Yeah.
place, we want to sit down, and I always suggest over a snack or over milk and cookies because it's going to keep them engaged.
Yeah.
And we say, hey, so let's talk about what happened this morning because you were really upset. Can we think about, can you tell me, what got you there, what upset you so much, and to try to help them identify the trigger, like what was the thing,
Yeah.
what started it, right?
Okay.
And so then, and we want to go so specific to, and so then what happened, like, did you feel like, my stomach tightened up or I
Yeah.
got really mad, I couldn't think of a word, so then
Okay.
like their body tensed
Yeah.
up or whatever the physical manifestations are, because then we can help, that's how we help them recognize the trigger. So next time you feel like your body tenses up, we need to stop right then.
And say,
Instead
"My
of
body's tensing up."
right, my body's tensing
Yeah.
up. I don't know what's going on, or I feel like, and then the cue for the adult is, well, do you feel like you're going to have a meltdown? Let's stop. Let's
Yeah.
take all the stimulus away and try to get to what the need is, so we can meet the need and we can avoid the meltdown. Okay, Tara, that sounds really like, oh, you can do this.
Oh, no, trust
but
me, I know. It's
you
hard.
can, but it's going to take several
Yeah.
times for the child to be able to figure it out.
Yeah,
right?
because understanding, when I was an adult and went back to therapy, my therapist was asking me that, what happens in your body right before? I had no idea. I was so out of touch with my body and the physiological response that was going on in my body. I had no idea. My flip
Right.
had flipped, my switch had flipped, and I had already moved into motion. And so, what a beautiful thing to teach a child at 6 and 7,
Right.
because that's not what my parents knew to do.
And if we say, what is it, or do you know what started, or what was the trigger? And they say, I don't know. So we want to say, okay, so in that moment, what would have made it better?
Yeah, okay.
Because to try to get to the end, right, and then we're going to work it back. So in that moment, and if they say, well, if I could have just been able to write, okay, so are you frustrated that you didn't know the letter? Like, so
Yeah.
what are we going back to, right? And
Okay.
so in a school, it's a little bit different, right?
Sure.
And we had this issue with I'll use my own example. We had a couple of outbursts at school, and so I brought her home and I said, so what's going on? And we started talking about it. And after several conversations, one of the things she said was, well, people are in my face and my brain gets all swirly,
Yeah.
right? And so that was the way and I said, what does that feel like? Tell me what happens when your brain gets swirly. And again, after multiple conversations, so just putting this together so it's not a long story,
Sure.
she came up with, my face gets really hot,
Okay.
and that her stomach feels like it's going to drop, and that
Yeah.
everybody's looking at her. And so when we think about that as an adult, you're flush and your stomach drops and you feel like everybody's you're embarrassed,
Yeah.
right? But she doesn't know that.
Yeah.
She doesn't need to know that word either.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Well, you could tell
right.
her, but
yeah, right. But it's not
she
about
recognized the feeling.
the feeling, right? So then we said, hey, so if your stomach starts to drop or your face is hot, you feel people, ask the teacher if you can have some self-time. And we talked to the teacher, right? So
Yeah.
to get her, my brain, and we used her words, tell the teacher your brain's swirly, and we said, can you set her outside or set her in the corner, not to punish her,
Yeah.
to help her, regain
Wow.
control. And so the way we do it is the way we do any of those things is what we're doing is regulating, or helping the child learn self-regulation, right? So anything we teach a kid, first we regulate for them, right? Then we co-regulate, and then they're able to regulate on their own, right? So we show them how to do it, and then we're going to do it together, and then they'll be able to ask on their own, right? And so now in the moment she can say she can actually not even need the teacher. She can just tell herself, I need some time away from people, or I need to stop listening,
Yeah.
so that I can get back to where I need to
Yeah.
be. And so those are
great
really
gift.
advanced,
Yeah.
right? But we've been working on that for, since she was
Little.
right in kindergarten, and now in the 8th grade she can do it, or 7th
Yeah.
grade. She's in 7th grade.
That's good.
But and I think that's about the tantrums. Where is it coming from? How can we meet that need? If we can just tell us, the child can just express appropriately the need, then
Yeah.
we can avoid the tantrum,
Yeah.
right? And at school, I think it's like when you're in a group, I think it's really about, helping the teacher understand if you're able to kind of recognize, or if my child asks for this, if you can help them with this, that it's going to, kind of, it benefits them and the whole group, right? Because otherwise,
Yeah.
I always tell teachers, say sometimes, I don't have time to individualize, and I'm like, you
Yeah.
better make time, because
Yeah.
if you don't do that 5 minutes up front,
Yeah.
they're going to take 10 minutes
So
at the end
you,
of class,
as a
like
parent,
throwing
you-
chairs and
yeah,
doing
you
whatever.
could say, I know that's in a training situation,
Right.
but as a parent, I mean, you do have to, and I'm an older parent. I just turned 49, so I don't know if I could have done this at 32. But the strength to speak up for my child, you know what I mean? Like to say, you know what, this is coming from a need.
Mm-hmm.
This is a need, and she needs to have this met.
Right.
Because she might not be able to say, at 12 you can say my brain's swirly, or even at 10 or whatever, but at 5, 6, 7.
Right, and so then we
can
want to
start,
help,
but-
right? Because we want to help the teacher say, hey, so when you start noticing her doing these things,
Yeah.
if you could do this, and then we
Yeah.
want to work together. We want to approach the teacher as, that we're on the same team. We definitely don't want to, say, you don't know how to handle
adversarial.
my kid, my
Okay.
kids. That we don't want to, but we want to do. Look, we've noticed this, or obviously we're talking because we're having some issues, and so
Yeah.
if this is how we deal with it at home,
Yeah.
can you help me with how do you want to deal with it in the classroom, so we can
Yeah.
work together, we can kind of be on the same page.
That's good.
Because I do think that oftentimes the teacher's doing the best they can as
Sure.
well, right? Because you said, they have 20 kids, and
Yeah.
and it is a lot.
Yeah.
But we want our kids to be successful, and the way that they're successful is one of the things I always tell teachers too is we have to think about those kids, and as a teacher, the only thing that you can do is teach to the majority, right? Like that's
Yeah.
the
I mean,
like
unfortunately,
that's
right?
the to teach in a way that you are
Like a shotgun
grabbing
approach?
grabbing the most kids, right?
Yeah.
But there's always these kids in the minority, right? And so those tend to be our kids, right? The kids from chaotic backgrounds, the kids that are have the behavior issues. So I always ask teachers, who teaches to them, right? Like, and so I don't know the answer, and I've challenged thousands of teachers to come
Yeah.
up with it. But the best I can come up with is pick one each year and kind of try to bring them in, and like. And I know that sounds like
I
it's,
know.
but it's like, what else do we do, right? And so, and maybe it's one, you get them in, and then, the next 6 weeks is another or whatever. But we have to, kind of bring these kids into the fold.
Yeah.
Because otherwise they just get
I hope
further
we
and
have some
further and
teachers
further.
listening. I hope there's teachers
Yeah,
listening.
well, if there is, I know you're going to give my information, and I
Yeah.
go to the schools and I'll train for free. So you have to hear a little bit about Tepelchin, and
That's
so,
totally fine.
but then
Great organization.
usually I'll do. I've done where it's on a in-service day, or
Yeah.
a lot of times I'll do faculty meetings. So they give me an hour. An hour is great. I would like to have more, but I know
How
that
long
it's
would you,
time.
just so I know?
The least is an hour.
Okay, but how much, what would be amazing, and what would you be willing to do?
So like if I get 2.5 hours, or like on a the hard part about the professional development days or in-service days is everybody has them at the same time, and I can only be
Oh,
one
yeah.
place,
Yeah, yeah,
right? And so I'll have like 5 or 6 calls on this day, and so that becomes harder, and so that's why the faculty meeting works a little bit better.
I had some good ideas. You need to put
But
together
yeah.
some online training for you and get it out to lots
Yeah.
of districts. Yeah.
We actually do, and I mean now we can do that. Like,
Yeah.
and I'll tell you, like, I don't enjoy virtual training because you
know.
don't have only because you don't get. I feel like it's not as personalized because you're not getting the reaction. Like
Yeah.
if I'm training somebody and they're making a face, or they're like, I'm like, okay, so you obviously this is not striking a
Yeah.
chord with. Let me know. Why are you looking at me crazy? Like what's going on? And then I
Yeah.
can
You can-
and that's hard. Or
sure.
like I tend to tell a lot of jokes and say funny stories, and you can't hear them
I
laughing.
totally understand. I understand.
So that's but I'm getting there.
And
It's
because you're
it's
a
new
people person,
thing.
like your
yeah,
daughter.
yeah.
Okay, so Arnold, I don't want to keep, because, foster parents are very busy, so I don't ever
Mm-hmm.
want to go on too long. I don't want to, I think we've gotten some really good nuggets today. Don't
I
you
hope
think?
so.
Yeah.
I think the big thing is,
What is the big thing? I want to know.
well, the big thing is realizing that the trauma that the kids are suffering is real, even if it seems irrational. If their fears seem irrational or their behaviors seem irrational, one of the things I think that sometimes people think they have a hard time distinguishing between behaviors and trauma, things that are,
Okay.
or because of trauma. And I'm going to tell you, very, very few kids are willfully defiant. There's very, very, very few of them. And those kids tend to have some organic, mental health issues.
Yeah.
So most of it is,
Trauma
is
related.
trauma, or it's been conditioned, or that's how they're getting their needs met, even
Yeah.
if it's in a negative way eventually. And
Yeah.
so we need to kind of pull some of that back, realize how, no matter how irrational it may seem, it is real, and validate those feelings for them. Then
Yeah.
take a second and give yourself a break, and
Yeah.
let yourself know that you have your own stuff, and that's okay, and you're going to be fine, and you can do this.
You're gonna be fine.
And
We
take
can
a
do
breath.
this. Yeah.
And it's work. And,
Yeah.
and just realizing that the biggest thing is, to kind of build trust with your child. And how do you do that, right? So I'll end with this. How do you build a connection? How do you build trust? Well, so think about the person you trust most in the world. Not the person you should trust most in the world, but the person you do trust most in
Yeah.
the world. And then I'm going to ask you a question, and then I'll answer it, right? And if your answer is different than mine, then we can talk.
Okay.
So why do you trust that person? Well, the answer is because they were there when you needed them.
Yeah.
And
They've
that's
shown me.
Right, and that's how we build
Yeah.
trust. So how do you think we build trust with our kids? We got to be there when
They need
they
us.
need us. And it's
Yeah.
not, it's little times too. It's not the big giant stuff.
No,
It's
it
just
is. Mm-hmm.
it's just the little things. And if we can start doing that, then everything just tends to be easier, because they know they trust you. They know that what you're asking them to do is a good thing. Or I
Yeah.
think they're not waiting for that other shoe to drop, or waiting for
Yeah.
you to disappoint them.
Yeah. So, Arnold, at the end of all of these podcasts, so I'll tell you the backstory. All my life, at least as an adult, I remember, when I would struggle with something, or I would like seek out some advice or answer or whatever, or someone just said something to me that I'm like, that's so profound. I write it on a note card. And so I always posted note cards all over my house. There's the kitchen, my laundry room, my car, just affirmations, I do hard things. Or there's one from Adele Faber that I got years ago from the book, How to Talk. So it might have been for that one. It's from any of her books. But what she says is, when trouble arises, we don't blame, we look for solution. So my boys know that because I posted it and would say it all the time. When trouble arises, it's almost like I was affirming myself so that I could, when trouble arises, we don't blame, we look for solution.
Right.
So after each podcast, I'm wanting to take away something. And I'm calling them the Wisdom from the Well cards. And so everybody who's listening to this podcast has an opportunity to click on a link in the show notes and download today's Wisdom from the Well cards. I'm putting you on the spot. And if
Yeah,
you can't
you
think
are.
of anything, I'll go back and listen. You've said a lot of great
Right.
nuggets, but I would love to have a quote from you. It can even be a quote from someone else if you tell us who it is, but something that would encourage foster parents, that would, maybe even challenge them a little bit, something that you would see beneficial for them to read on a daily basis and post as they're trying to navigate some really sticky, muddy waters right now.
Right. And so I think, so I hope this fits. And I think it is, I think it's John Lennon, actually.
Oh.
And so,
You're
and
gonna
I
give us a
always,
quote from
it's
John
something
Lennon?
that my mom told me when I was little. I used to hate it. But as an adult, it makes a lot of sense. And I tell it to my daughter. And what it is, it will be fine in the end. And if it's not fine, it's not the end. Right.
Oh,
And
that's
that's a
good.
huge journey
Yeah.
for these, these kiddos are in a place, and it's going to be fine if you put the work in and you build a connection. And if you're not fine yet, you're not done.
at the
You're
end.
not at the end of it.
Yeah, that's good.
Right. And so I think I want to thank all the foster parents and adopted parents. This is a
Yeah.
huge sacrifice that you make that you don't
Yeah.
always get.
Return. Or see it.
Yeah, you don't see it, or you don't always get the praise or that you would want in the moment. But these kids don't have anybody, and so thank you for being there for them.
Oh, that's good. Thank you, Arnold. Thank you for being there for me.
You're welcome.
Yeah, because you've pointed me in direction to recognize that these behaviors, even though I have no idea what she might be afraid of or what's at the root of that, it is fear.
It
It
is.
is fear driven.
And it's valid.
Yes, and it's
real,
valid,
Phil. It's
right.
real. For her, it's real fear. I'm going to end with two things. Don't
Yeah,
forget,
yeah.
I'm sure Tara will have my contact information. Don't
Yes,
forget
please say it.
if you're.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Okay, yeah. And so it's avaldez@depelchin.org. But
Mm-hmm.
email me if you would like for me to check to your school, or if you're interested in being a foster adoptive parent, right? We're
Yes.
always looking for foster parents.
Yes, what a great journey it has been. It's a challenging journey. I cannot think, this makes me tear up, I cannot think of a more healing journey for parents and children
Right.
than that. It's
Absolutely.
beautiful.
It is.
So,
And if you're a teacher, you're doing a great job. This is hard.
Yeah.
Don't be hard on yourself, right?
yeah, because that doesn't get us anywhere. That's
Right.
the thing I've learned is like, it's not, you've got to do better, you've got to do better. It's, oh man, that's hard. And I know you can do this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, compassion.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Compassion.
Yep.
So thank you, Arnold. I
No,
hope you'll
thank you.
come back
I
sometime.
will. I know.
mean,
I'm probably the worst because I talk.
No, you're amazing. You're
so much.
amazing. You know what's a great thing about a podcast is, we can rewind it, right?
Right.
Or you can listen again. So it was good information. It was helpful, and I'm going
hope
to
so.
pass your name along to
Absolutely.
some districts.
And I'll come back anytime, whenever you.
Okay. All
So
right.
thanks for having me.
So thank you for listening. Thanks for joining us today at the Mama's Well podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And, of course, download your Wisdom from the Well card. I'm going to make sure I get that John Lennon quote exactly right. And it'll be on your card, so make sure you download that. And we'll see you next time.
Mama's well.
Yes, she